Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me Type Weekend, and thanks to everyone who's going to be watching this. I'm really happy to know that at this point in time, people might still be caring about type, or the type might still give them some joy or some escape from the real world, which we know might be crazy. And since I'm recording this a few days in advance, I'm really hoping that nothing crazy and unthinkable and insane has happened like it sometimes does in 2020. And I'm going to be talking about how I went from an unemployed graduate of a design school in Siberia to a designer living in New York City, in the hope that that might help and be entertaining. I am fortunate to have had amazing experiences of working with really great clients on really great projects, including some exhibition design, signage, and wayfinding projects, and some really big wayfinding systems and installations, environmental design installations, and books, and interiors, and also exteriors of what we call a cover. Sometimes I treat them as illustrations, sometimes I treat them as typographic compositions. I obviously also love working on brand identities and everything that they come with, like collateral and all the other fun stuff. And I do custom word marks a lot, lettering projects, and also a lot of corporate communication, like annual reports, publications, magazines, type design lately, and all different fun ways to make your lives more colorful and more typographically interesting. And I'm really happy to be doing this, and I could not really wish for much more to spend my days doing. The studios that I worked with here in the United States are on the left, and the clients, some of the clients that I worked with from different fields, are on the right. And I've done some work that I'm really, really happy about, and that's something that some of it that you just saw before. But I've also done a lot of work that I don't usually share, and I prefer not to share, because we always try to put our best foot forward and try to show the best work to get hired and attract attention of people. But we end up, even when we talk about making mistakes and how failure is so great at conferences and on social media, we still end up not, I think, sharing the work that was really bad. But I think it could be a fun and educational experience for me to embarrass myself today. And one thing that I wanted you to know about me is that I'm roughly from somewhere this area on the map. I don't think I placed that cross correctly at all, but in Siberia, roughly speaking, you would never know. And I moved to New York City about 6 years ago, and I never knew anyone living here, and I kind of came and I was able to get an entry-level job, and so that's basically what my presentation is about. And when I say that I'm from Russia, obviously you get some images in your head, and that's normal. We all like to generalize, and that's who we are. But I didn't grow up around some cool churches and palaces. I grew up in some prefabricated housing that was really stripped of any detail, pretty much. Didn't have any cool lettering on top. The building that I grew up in, but Russia is kind of known for a lot of constructivist heritage that it had. But by the time that I came around, it was more kind of the thing on the right, where it was a lot of advertising, and people were trying to get used to this new market economy and putting up a lot of advertising that they did using the personal computers that they just have acquired. And there were amazing graphic designers and fine artists living in Russia, but I actually didn't know anything about them up until I was, already on my way during my professional career. So people like Kazimir Malevich or El Lisitsky here were not really a part of my vocabulary growing up, and the closest I've ever gotten to suprematism is the stuff that's on the right. There was a lot of Arial, and there was a lot of Times New Roman, and there was a lot of shapes and colors and standard fonts. And one of the things that I kind of keep thinking about and trying to explain how Russia changed culturally, economically, and socially after the Soviet Union disappeared is that in the 90s, when I started school, everyone still had all of these same composition books or exercise books, as you might call them in different parts of the world, and they were all kind of exactly the same, made the same across the country, and everyone used them. But then in the 90s, there was this explosion of color and shape and photography and illustration, and these were the exercise books that I ended up staring at during long hours at school, and I kept wondering that there must be someone who actually does this for a job, and this must be a really cool job to do, putting together all these shapes and colors and letters. And so I entered a local design school, and it was a bit old-fashioned, I should say, and the architectural education there was pretty good, but we spent most of our time doing the drawing, the painting, and sculpting, and learning about the Renaissance, and people there were amazing and definitely enabled my career and me thinking about design, the frameworks, and the school of thought, but there weren't really any typographic education, and I started getting obsessed with typography, and I had no resources to study it anywhere. There were no books, there were no magazines, and so I was kind of left alone with small images on the internet, and this is something that I did after I saw the movie called Helvetica that I completely was obsessed with entirely and kept rewatching and made my friends watch, and I did my first portfolio I think the same year basically, and it was all in Helvetica. It was like very black type on white, and don't look at the typesetting is so horrible. and I kind of kept doing that thing, and I found out that Helvetica had different weights, and I started using them, and of course all of my Helveticas were stolen from the internet, and I learned that I didn't know about things until I saw them, so I started seeking out more things online and trying to kind of find more about the history of design and what other people were doing, and that was crucial. And I think this massively influenced all of my work. You can see that I had no idea how to print anything on a hard hat, but I did have this clear idea of wanting to escape the messiness and the layers of the world, the gray world that I was living in, and just having like one word on the page was my dream. And then, typographically, all of these projects were just very unimaginative and really poorly typeset. I'm not afraid to say. And, gradually I started learning more about serifs, let's say, and small caps, and how you can fold a poster. And then I got actually a job because there were no internships in Russia at the time when I did this. So I just got hired for a temporary job, and they made me do this visual identity, and then they set me down to do the mechanicals, and I realized that I don't know how to do patterns, and I just thought that you just eyeball it, so I didn't align and distribute anything. And someone found out, and I was in big trouble. Not really big trouble, but I was sitting quietly in a corner, very embarrassed. And that's how I learned that it's good to surround yourself with your peers, because people will actually know other things that you don't know. And I sometimes, had weird gaps in my knowledge, but I kind of kept going. I didn't see any good magazines because I didn't have any. There was like one graphic design magazine in Russia, and you had to pay a lot of money and wait for 3 weeks for it to ship. So I only got that a few years into my career, but they asked me to make a coffee table book about the economic forum in Siberia, and I did something without knowing what the grids were, because I have never seen a single book about grids, and I didn't know how books worked at all. And I kept wanting to do some lettering, and I wish that I kind of knew that at some point, obviously, I find out that to draw letter A, I really need to have seen 1,000 letters A, because all of the A's that I was drawing didn't come out right. And I wish that at that point I knew that maybe it's better to use a font, and the top left thing is actually a font, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, I kept going, and my lettering was still not great, so you could see that I put it in a grid. I learned to align and distribute, and I learned to work with gradients and colors, and learn to combine fonts and work with photography better. And I was getting some freelance gigs that were actually pretty nice, and that taught me a lot. But here, the logo type was something that the art director helped me figure out, because mine was way worse. And again, the typesetting, that I think not just me, but traditionally people that I looked towards for references, they would just kind of like put type in a column and not do anything with it, and it wouldn't interact with anything. And at some point, I really wanted to kind of stop commercial work, and I knew that I could be getting better faster if I did some self-initiated projects, because I could control everything about them and subject matter and what I did. So basically I took almost a year of paid work to do this thesis project, my graduate project, which was a wayfinding system for the city that I grew up in. And not that this was really very typographically imaginative, but I learned this whole new industry of wayfinding, and that helped me massively. And I just really spent so much time on all these diagrams and the crazy maps, and I built those all from scratch, and I printed things and threw them in the sand to photograph them. And I learned that I think some unpaid jobs were more helpful than some paid jobs, and this project was very good for me to have in my portfolio. And then I graduated, and I still wanted to keep getting better, and I was just making things up, and I kind of woke up in the morning and thought, why won't I do a book cover? And again, the type is really lame. I can't believe that I set this all in 3D to make this gate, referencing the concentration camps, because this is Man's Search for Meaning, which is about concentration camps. But I totally didn't do anything with the type at all, which is very lame. And I had the luxury to do these things instead of doing paid work, and I really, understand now very well how much of a luxury it is, that not everyone is capable of just, spending time on silly things like that don't pay the bills. And I was doing some freelance work, and I learned, I think, how to work hard on the craft and focus on photography and gradients and colors and Pantones and make it look professional in a way. But then I still wanted to keep moving and keep improving, and I thought that the jobs that I was going to get in Russia were not really fully allowing me to do that, so I applied to a lot of internships and I got a lot of rejections. There were practical things like, before we consider your application, this company said, please can you confirm you're eligible to live and work full-time and without restriction in the UK? So, of course not. Goodbye. Then some of these emails that I got in response said, your work is interesting, but we can't offer internships to non-students. So, I had nothing to do with this. I could not afford another degree. Some of them were like, I sent my applications to some really nice places because I was ambitious, but they said, well, we are very fortunate to pick out of the really best designers, and some people had stronger work without explanation, so this is not super helpful, although I did appreciate the response because of course most of the time you don't get any response at all, and early on it was explained to me that that's normal, so it didn't crush me every time, and that's really fortunate because otherwise I would definitely stop trying and just settle for a job that I could get probably in my hometown. But basically then there was this one email that I think changed a lot for me, and I'm really grateful to the people who wrote it, from a very famous Scandinavian studio that I was really obsessed with, and they said that they were looking for someone who worked in signage, so I thought, wow, this is a really amazing fit, but they said we chose someone who had more experience in typography, and I was like, wait, I have a lot of experience in typography? I've been doing typography for years, like, what do you even mean? And then I had nothing to do, I was like at home, barely getting any jobs, so or barely wanting to take any jobs, and I thought about it long and hard, and I learned to keep getting better because, I think I started to figure it out what they meant, and then I was doing this unpaid kind of competition entry, and I thought, well, maybe I can make a typeface, and maybe that's something that would interest those kinds of people, and it will help me gain more experience in typography. The way that they meant it, and that was obviously not very good, but I kept going, and I worked with more editorial, like I wrote this whole set of books about Bauhaus and Bauhaus directors, and I printed this, and I spent like a month's worth of my income to print this, and I didn't yet learn about the H&J, hyphenation, and justification, so I can't show any of this in my portfolio because of how badly ragged things are. I didn't know what ragging was, and that was one of the weird things that I didn't learn until recently. And I kept going with the lettering also, and because I didn't have a creative director for many of these projects, I was doing them freelance. I learned to be my own critic. I learned to be my own mentor in a way, however messed up that sounds. So I went back and improved them later on, and that's a thing you can do if you want to. And then, signage jobs were super helpful, and again, I kind of learned a decent way of presenting this. And then I started learning more about, what language as a part of branding and identity is, and I think my sensitivity got a lot better in this, and I made this brand identity that I volunteered to donate a non-profit organization in Russia, and I thought that was pretty good already, and I still showed that in my portfolio. And another thing with lettering is that I realized that the longer I worked on these projects, the better I was getting, and that's one thing I really, really love about um, lettering and typesetting, is that the more you work at it, the better you get, and it just takes time, but it's totally under your control to get better at it, which is amazing. Not everything is like that. And then I had this portfolio of projects in 2014 that I showed you pretty much all of them, and that is how you get an internship in New York City. And I was able to move, and I was lucky enough to discover that some of those visa issues and some of those work authorization and legal issues were easier dealt with in United States, and some of the bigger companies in New York that really valued, I think, design talent were willing to bet on me, because I was willing to get myself there and work for a pretty low wage and work hard to really care about what I was doing. And then the company that I got in was Pentagram in New York City, and this was a portfolio, and that is how I think I did it. And then obviously I always learn more things, and there's always more things to learn, and I still really enjoy the ride, and thank you so much for listening.